But harvesting a tree takes years of expertise and steady hands.
Há que ter paciência. Há varilhas, como a gente cá chama, que é dois homens, para se ajudarem um ao outro, com muito cuidado, para não dar cabo das árvores.
We went inside the world's largest cork forest to see how Portugal produces 40 million cork stoppers a day. These are cork oak trees. They're so special. They've been protected under Portuguese law since 1209, so harvesters have strict rules to follow. The trees can't be touched for the first 15 years of their lives, and they can only be harvested every 9 years, so the bark has time to grow back in between. Since the first 2 harvests of a new tree don't produce the best cork, harvesters have to wait 33 years to get the good stuff. Every summer, harvesters peel off the bark using century-old techniques.
Sim, isto é machadas próprias para tirar a cortiça, já se experimentou com máquinas, as máquinas não dão. Depois o homem tem que ir lá na mesma tirar a cortiça.
Only the outer layer can be harvested.
Normalmente, quando se aprende a tirar a cortiça, aprende-se que a primeira machadada que se dá no sobrego tem que ser devagar, para ver a grossura da cortiça. É muito difícil, tem muita ciência para se tirar, para no fim as árvores não saírem feridas. E as árvores são feridas, normalmente começa a entrar umidade, começa a entrar bicho e com o passar dos anos elas vão acabar ou por cair ou por morrer.
To prevent that, workers leave the inner layer untouched.
We can harvest the bark of the tree without damaging the bark, so these cells can grow again without any impact in the life of the tree.
Because the trees regenerate, they'll never run out of cork. The oldest tree on record is an estimated 200 years old and has been harvested 20 times in its lifetime. After the cork planks are stripped from the trees, they're pressed between concrete slabs for 6 months. Then they're sent to a processing facility to be boiled for at least an hour. That's to sterilize the planks and make them softer. This machine punches out the stoppers we see in our wine bottles. Those corks are shipped out to 100 different countries. But the rest of the cork left behind in this process isn't wasted.
We don't waste anything, even the small residues.
All that byproduct can be made into things like flooring or granulated stoppers used to cork less expensive wines. Cork harvesting goes back millennia. Egyptians used stoppers in tombs, and the Romans used cork in shoes. Today, Portugal harvests 100,000 tons of cork every year and owns a third of the cork oak forests in the world.
That is a real retainer of CO2, protected for biodiversity. This tree that separates the south of Europe and North Africa from the Sahara Desert, so it's a barrier to desertification.
Cork sustainability was part of what saved the Portuguese wine stopper. In the early 2000s, winemakers began turning to synthetic closures and screw tops for bottles, and the value of cork plummeted. But as consumers became more environmentally conscious in the 2010s,
the movement against single-use plastics that is happening all over the world, it's a real opportunity for cork.
Cork exports grew 52.3% in nearly a decade. In 2018, Portugal passed a record $1 billion worth of cork exports.
Doctor is giving free money to
number and very close to 1.1 billion in 2019, and now we are waiting for the final numbers of 2020. But as a global pandemic, as a global crisis, we are expecting also some impact in our business.
Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2020 harvest didn't stop.
The cork harvest this year happened very smooth. We are talking about an activity that is done at open air itself.
The industry's success in the last decade has allowed Portugal to take its cork products into other industries.
From construction to automotive industry, to aerospatial, to sports, fashion, clothes.
But even as cork demand continues to grow, harvesters plan to keep doing things the same way they always have, with a good axe.
Work.
Next up, we're headed to New Zealand, home to thousands of sheep in need of a haircut.
I'm here.
Here in the New Zealand countryside, 25,000 sheep are sheared in just 10 days.
It is a nightmare trying to keep the sheep still.
Just got kicked in the face.
But
a good shearer can shear a sheep in a minute, and the sheep won't even wriggle, it will just sit there.
This wool normally would be cleaned, dyed, woven, and sold across the globe as rugs and clothes. But due to growing dependence on synthetic fabrics and a trade war with China, the value of wool has plummeted.
All of a
The
sudden,
workload
the
is
revenue
bigger.
to their business has
You
just
can have
disappeared
your
overnight.
own.
And not only is the revenue gone, it's actually turned into a cost.
And it's left
Look at that.
farmers like Andrew and Meredith with bales and bales of wool they can't sell.
Now farmers are
Can't.
basically giving it away or throwing it away.
What?
So what happened?
Start eating
Back
the
in the
animal.
1950s, wool was basically like gold in New Zealand.
Farmers would produce one clip of wool and be able to pay off a whole piece of land, like buy a farm outright. It was the golden era for farmers in New Zealand.
Andrew's grandparents
enough
bought Roanoke
girls in the
Station
world,
here
you
in
think?
Taihape, New Zealand.
I'm third generation. It's great
People
to
are
carry
gonna
on
eat either
what
way
Dad and
less
Granddad
clothes.
have slaved away at doing.
Andrew was
Soon
working for
they
his
will
dad
be
when the
without
industry hit its
clothes
peak in
also.
1988,
We were
with wool
going in like
exports
that.
valuing $1.9 billion. That made wool New Zealand's second biggest export after meat. Andrew took over the farm about 15 years ago, and since he's grown it to about 7,600 acres, raising 25,000 sheep.
Not a bad office when you get a view like this. It's blooming awesome, so quiet, especially this time of the day. It's beautiful.
When I'm
Andrew
done,
raises
do you
Romney
go
sheep.
wages?
Their coarse wool
That's
has to be
perfect.
sheared twice a year for the sheep to stay healthy.
Without taking the wool off, they do get dags and sort of dirty bottoms and stuff like that, and that can attract flies. And if they attract flies, flies can actually land on them and lay their eggs. That will actually kill a sheep.
Also, think about how hot a New Zealand summer is. In 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that wool...
It's like wearing a great big furry jacket in the middle of the summer. If they're really, really woolly, when they lie down, they get stuck on their back and they actually can't stand up again and they die. Seriously.
In January, Andrew's staff heads out to round up sheep for the first shearing of the year.
Basically, all the mustering's done on horseback, horse and dogs.
Using 20
We should
horses,
stop
4 ATVs, and 8
them
dogs,
from
they gather
dying.
up 3,600 sheep
Where
at
are
a
the
time.
wolf?
They all have a couple of
The
heading
wolf
dogs
should eat.
and some hunaways. So the heading dogs are used for just heading the sheep and getting them going in the right
Teach
direction,
dog how
and the
to eat.
hunaways are the ones that bark
The
and
dead
move
one?
the stock along. So it's all done on whistle command. We'll have a different whistle for left and right and stop and go. Got them heading the right way. They'll start coming around and joining up with the other lot.
They're all rounded up into this shed.
Last lot brought in from mustering. They'll be drafted into their different lines.
The sheep are separated into groups, lambs or babies, and adult ewes or female sheep.
We've got the ewes wool here, 36 micron. It's a lot coarser and harder.
So it's best used for flooring, like carpets and rugs.
And then lamb's wool, which is 29 micron. It's a lot softer, finer.
So it's better for blankets and clothes. The sheep are each weighed and lined up for shearing. Andrew hired a gang of 8 contract shearers for the job.
We're under the shearing shed right now, which is pretty hot, noisy and dusty, and we're shearing about 2,000 sheep today.
The gang brings its own tools.
What you've got here is pretty much the same as what your barbers will have. We call this a cutter at the top and the comb at the bottom, which we put on every time. It's just scissor action that goes across.
One by one, Travis will pull a lamb out.
So you'll start off with the belly. It's the easiest way to get that out of the way, and then it's just a rhythm that you kind of want to do to get around the sheep, and it's a pattern. So you're basically just taking off as much wool as you can.
That cutter will last only about 15 minutes before it gets dull.
Sharpen the gear so you can get a clean cut on the sheep.
Meet the first ever all-Google phone with the best camera on a Pixel yet. It's smart enough to make photos vanish with Magic Eraser. Motion is made silky smooth with Motion Mode, and Face on Blur brings faces into focus. Google Pixel 6, for all that you are.
Yeah, as soon as a child is born, they have that lens. Government should outline their bucket already. Yeah, if you go Mauritius, you see the government keep promising that to all the other citizens. As soon as you start school, you get a job, you got a pad. It's only promises take money to make you pay PTA. You know how many people is dead without knowing what PTA is? And how many people are dead? The funny thing is, if you give birth, you gotta pay debt. No, your child gotta pay that debt. I had mine in prison, so you know what I mean?
14 c'est quoi? C'est qu'aucun projet diminué. Quand on parle de quoi? Tu veux venir?
But don't worry, this doesn't hurt the sheep.
It is actually just a haircut for the sheep.
So you try and do everything the same. It makes it easy on your body as well. Makes the sheep comfortable. Making sure that they're in the best state when they go out, minimising nicks.
Is the sheep telling you?
It's a tough job. Shearing gangs work long hours in the heat, wrestling with livestock.
Oh, you're right.
When you go to the barber, just a little cut, you go,
It's a nightmare trying to keep the sheep still. They kick and wriggle and stuff like that. A good shearer could shear a sheep
the
in
barber
like
does
1
like
minute,
this
and
to
to
you,
watch them do it is amazing. They are so fast.
The more you do it, the more experienced you are. But at
Yeah,
the
da
start, it's
place
never easy. It takes a big toll on your body and mind.
Mauritius.
These guys are so good at taming
To
sheep.
save
They can
oil,
shear
they
over
split.
300 in a day. Rousey's gather up the fleece and
Yeah,
pressers
should
push it into
have.
huge bales.
200 kilos
It
a
will
bale.
have
In
saved
2015, Andrew would have sold his stock
the
quickly for $7
petrol
a
from
kilo. But
splitting
today,
I
everywhere.
was just talking to the wool broker last night. He sort
$7
of came back
kilo.
with this $1.20. I'm thinking, oh god, this is not great.
Big box
when you
like this
add in
is
the
a
increasing
kilo.
costs of shearer contracts, it's now more expensive to shear the sheep than the wool is actually worth.
My farm
£7
5 years
a
ago,
rag,
we might have been
£7 a
making
jacket.
net cost $50,000 or $60,000 revenue. So it's gone from making 50 to costing 30. So it's an $80,000 a year change.
It's soul destroying to see the wool prices so low when it's the most amazing natural product.
So why is the wool worth so little?
You
Well,
stop
demand is
making
way
money
down because a few
when you
decades
reach
ago,
the limit
cheaper
of
synthetic
making money.
fabrics began replacing coarse
Bank
wool
say how
in
much
flooring
money you should
products.
have in your
Wool
account.
is biodegradable,
When you reach
sustainable,
that much,
and
you
fire
should give up
resistant,
business.
but it's expensive.
To be honest, the average person can't afford 100% wool carpets.
Synthetic rugs are made of plastic fiber, so they're harmful for the environment and are highly
A lot of people
flammable,
don't
but
understand.
they're a third of the price. And their growing popularity took.
Then, he artificially creates the conditions that cause oysters to spawn.
We're controlling the temperature in the tank specifically. It's the all-you-can-eat buffet, getting them ready to spawn.
We had a huge run on retail, which lasted for about a week to 2 weeks. But then when we shut off all the restaurants, that's when everything came out of kilter.
Diversify.
You're not just dependent on a
With this
floor. You
one,
can put wool
probably
through
they
the
can
whole
get
house.
idea.
You can put wool through the whole office as well.
Wool can be
Up to him,
used in
it's up to
sofas, beds, drapes, upholstery, and even insulation.
Well, we're pretty
Have a
nervous,
hundred
really, to be
sheep,
honest.
you know,
Yeah,
huh?
and I think if we had a crystal ball, that would be fantastic. But nobody knows where things are headed.
For now, Andrew and Meredith aren't abandoning the industry just yet.
What?
At the end of the day, you've still got to shear the wool off them, and that may as well be
Don't
worth
say
something.
stuff like that,
we'll
say
hang
they're
out and see whether we
retired.
can
Like the
get through
roller
it.
coaster.
No, they're not pets. Haven't named any of them.
When you watch BBC, you get to
On the
know
other side of the
bus
world,
that training.
these farmers are being forced to throw away their livelihoods because of the pandemic.
You can know how early
These
you can.
potatoes aren't going to end up on your dinner table. Their final destination is this hole.
Oh my god, because of this pandemic.
We're in the small
all
town of
this
Sheridan,
potato
Montana,
going
on a
to
potato
waste.
farm. Normally, this time of year, Bill and Peggy would be sending their potatoes to be planted. Instead, they're throwing away 700 tons.
The potatoes have been awful good to us for a lot
They
of years.
come out of the ground, you know.
Just really turned
There's
sour.
no virus on the ground.
And the same thing is happening across the Northwest.
I mean, it was just unprecedented. It's the supply
That's
chain from the
sad.
growers to the supermarket that got interrupted.
More than half of our market
Having
shut
the
down by
food.
government mandate.
Yeah.
Now, farmers
Keep
across
listening to the
Idaho and
government
Montana
then.
are stuck with
Where them
mountains
poor
of potatoes.
people?
So
Them
why did
go
this all
pick up
happen?
Potato?
We
The
visited
mountain
Bouillon
of
Ranch,
potato.
where Peggy and Bill have been growing potato seed for 59 years. Normally, potato production across the Northwest looks like this.
That's sad.
It starts with a seed grower like Bouillon, where farmers grow a variety of seed strains.
Virtually all the potatoes grown started out from a certified seed, and that's a fairly rigorous process that avoids disease,
You know, fabric
imperfections.
with potato
Bouillon
is
grows
possible
3
as
different
well.
disease-free seed strains: Umatilla, Clearwater,
just
and Russet
alcohol.
Burbank potatoes.
That wind
Each
away
potato
from
variety goes to a specific
potato.
grower in either the fresh or processed segment. In the fresh segment,
you're actually seeing the potato in its true form.
That's foods like a raw potato at a grocery store or au gratin potatoes at your favorite restaurant.
The other side of that is we call it our process segment. You don't actually see the potato, you see the byproduct or the end result of that.
That's the bag of potato chips, the French fries at McDonald's, or the pre-cut fries in the frozen section.
If you're a fresh product grower, you'll plant a different variety or a different genetic line of potatoes. If you're a process grower, you'll grow a different product line. Just some fry better, they have a better color to them, others grow better.
Now back to the farm. Potato growers get the seed from bouillon and start planting in March. Then they harvest in early fall. Once the potatoes are out of the ground, they go into storage or are sent to a factory, where they're cleaned and turned into either fresh or processed potatoes.
When COVID hit, we had a huge run on retail, which lasted for about a week to 2 weeks. But then when we shut off all the restaurants, that's when everything came out of kilter.
Potatoes for food service, like restaurants, hotels, and catering, make up an estimated 55% of all potato crops.
Think of everything from white table restaurants clear down to your fast, quick service.
So when food service establishments shut down because of COVID-19, it was a chain effect. Processors cut down orders with growers. Out of options, the growers cut their orders with seed farmers. And more than half of the industry's potatoes were stranded on seed farms.
I'm trying to be like you, listening
in Peggy's
to the
case, her
government
customers
as
in
well.
Washington were cut back
Protocol,
more than 50%. And she and Bill were
days.
stuck with tons of seed they'd normally sell.
You can't take some of these facilities that are built directly for food service and then tomorrow flip a switch and make them able to sell into retail. You're asking a square peg in a round hole, I guess, is the best analogy I can come up with.
The surplus potatoes also couldn't just be sent to grocery stores.
Grocery stores or retails would have been bursting at the seams with potatoes if we redirected all that.
We had high hopes and maybe something would turn up, you know, that in a month or so we might be able to send them somewhere for some kind of processing. But this year's there's just no market for them. We're just taking them out, taking them into a burial pit.
Peggy and Bill have been forced to bury 1.4 million pounds of potatoes in total.
It's costing us money just to bury.
Anyway, so
I mean, between our time and labor and renting a large
when you see them people pissing on the floor and all this shit, a lot of time at the same spot, you see potato on the floor.
Just to get rid of them.
When you dump that many potatoes, the financial hit.
Yeah.
I mean, that was what's so heart-sickening is the financial burden.
So does that movie make sense to you? The one that grew potato millions. You can eat a lot of mashed potato and do the fire at your home. You can try this. Make sure you try this at home.
Pre-order now.
It takes a tremendous amount of capital to grow a crop of potatoes. Bankruptcies are starting to creep up.
Before the pandemic, Zach estimates Idaho farmers were looking at a 15-year high in potato prices. Now they're facing a 20-year low. Zach says a 100-pound sack of potatoes went from costing about $12 a sack to $3 a sack, and a farmer needs it to cost at least $5 to break even.
Waste.
Peggy and Bill are facing $140,000 in losses. For farmers across Idaho and Montana, that number comes to $8 million.
Some of these farmers are looking at red all over their balance sheet and there's no black to be seen.
Hope you
They'll
stop
be
growing them.
looking into increasing their lines of credit. They'll be needing to remortgage some of their property, you know, just trying to free up more capital to try and survive for next year.
When you put all your work and effort into growing them and the expense, the pride of what you grow, and then to just completely just throw it away and waste it.
To save some of the potatoes from going to waste, Bouillon Ranch got creative. Peggy and Bill have given out roughly 75,000 pounds of potatoes to the surrounding community.
He's organized 2 or 3 giveaway days, and we've had pickups from 100 miles away. People come and got potatoes. She's distributing them down on our street in town, just set up, and people stop. They give them a bag of potatoes, and just to try to get somebody benefit from them.
That's a good
Even though they're losing money on them, they'd rather
forget
see
about
some
money. The more you will give, the more you will give, the more
Farmers
you
are
will
also
receive.
mashing up potatoes into
Give
a
money,
compost-like
you will receive
mixture
money.
to feed cattle
You
next
give
year.
potato. You're not
Put them into
receiving
this
a lot
pile
of
and mix
potato.
straw. Then we're going to put plastic over the top of it and let it get totally broke down by next fall. At that point, if everything is okay and the rations, then we'll start feeding the calves.
Imagine you had that much of flour.
Money out of our
What
pocket,
would you have
trying
done?
to find another use of the spuds.
But all of that effort
What
barely
if
made
you
a
had
dent in the
that
number of
much of
stranded
rice?
potatoes.
What would you have done?
Right now, it's like 200,000
For
roughly
you
in there
people,
with
like
everything.
I
would
know
say
you can
it's
feel the
pretty
same
devastating, you know, for a small operation
punishment
for
of the
us.
hero.
All in all, an estimated 1.5 billion pounds of
But
potatoes
for
are
us
trapped in
poor
the supply
people,
chain
we only
across
know
the
the
U.S.
story by heart.
If I was advising a year ago, not knowing what was going to happen, I wouldn't have told them to do anything differently than they did now. If we'd have
So the
anticipated
loss is on your
COVID
head, dude.
wrong and had a short
Yeah,
crop,
yeah.
a very small crop, it would have been devastated to
What
food
loss?
hunger. We'd have had mass shortage of potatoes,
Me, I don't see
and
no
that would
loss.
have been even worse.
Potato lost?
Luckily,
Where he
Zach
went?
says all this food
Who
waste
took it?
won't lead to a shortage
Somebody
next year.
steal it?
Farmers are still planting potatoes, just not
I
as
see
much.
the owner giving
Going
for
forward
free.
this year, I think the farmers are doing the right thing.
We
No.
thought, you know, let's plant what we do and take the risk.
We already
The
have the
farmer
ground
is
prepared.
farming.
We raise most of our own seed and buy some. So I mean, you might as well just carry on. I guess that's kind of the farm and ranch. Bad years, you just start over the next
No,
year
just
and hope
close
for
everything.
a better season. If you didn't, you'd have quit a long time ago.
But that's the plight of a farmer. We're always looking for next year. Farmers farm for the love of farming. And even in tough times, we still will continue to farm for the love of farming.
You see? You have no loss, only gain if you're giving for free.
The pandemic didn't just threaten
Yeah, man,
America's
you
supply of
don't- you
potatoes,
don't need the
it also
money.
came after its meat.
What you gonna do? Buy meat.
When coronavirus
What are you gonna
outbreaks
do,
shut
money?
down meat processing
Buy
plants
pork.
across
Just
the
show you
U.S.,
how to build
animals
your
headed
own.
here were suddenly
Like a
stranded
bike.
here.
Teach
As
you how to
time has
build
gone
your
on
own.
and plants haven't been able to operate, that's created a big backlog of pigs.
With nowhere to send their pigs, some farmers were forced to euthanize their herds.
You're
Oh
literally
my
talking
man,
about
if you
millions
stop
and millions of
dumping
pigs
this,
that were intended to go to
the
market
world will
but are still
definitely be
remaining on the
affected,
farm.
yeah.
The backup at farms led to record-breaking meat prices and cleared out shelves. The U.S. was in the midst of a meat
Time
shortage.
fire
You start with
from
the ethics of it, like animals live and die to make your
bonfire
product,
can
and
be
then
good use in
get to the
modern day,
concentration
I
of it. It's a pretty hairy beast.
But why did this all happen? And how can we avoid it from happening in the future? America is the world's leading producer of beef and poultry.
Everybody should
It's also one of the
go
top
down.
producers of pork in the world. In the U.S. alone, an estimated 9 billion animals are slaughtered a year. In order to process all that meat, the industry is efficient and concentrated. Simply put, as many animals as possible move from the farm to the slaughterhouse as quickly as possible. When the system works, U.S. meat prices are among the most affordable on the planet. But that efficiency becomes a problem in the face of COVID-19. For one, workers operate in tight quarters.
They're in refrigerated environments with recirculating air. This was an environment in which COVID could apparently be spread easily from worker to worker.
An estimated 25,000 meatpacking workers have contracted COVID-19, and outbreaks in 167 plants forced 38 in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa to close. Since only a small number of plants handle most of the industry's meat,
When any one of them closes, it has an impact on the entire industry.
It's like the only store is shut down in town, and you can't get milk, right? If you're a farmer.
By
No,
early
that's
May,
big
beef and
joke.
pork plants were
London
running at
do
about
not
40%
own
below
one
the
cow.
processing volumes we
If
saw
you show
just a
me
year
one
ago,
cow
so
in
that's
London,
an enormous reduction
I
in
give up
processing
everything.
volumes and caused all kinds of
I don't have a
disruptions.
home, I'll
This
go
has
back
hit
on the
farmers
street.
like Mike hard.
When COVID started really impacting
But
the plants,
every
our
day you get
percentage
fresh meat.
of utilization of the plants just kind of kept going down and down and down. That's created a real backlog of pigs.
Every year, Mike and his co-op send about 150,000 hogs to the Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But when COVID-19 closed that plant, they had nowhere to send their animals.
We got our letter April 11th that the Smithfield plant was going to be closed. Turned out to be 4 weeks that they didn't receive any hogs in Sioux Falls.
Remember, the meat industry is streamlined to be exact.
We're looking for a very uniform end product.
The last ones are 284. These might be, I think they're going to be pretty close to that. It's real similar.
All the pigs Mike, or any farmer, sends to a plant have to weigh about 280 pounds.
If it gets above 300, 330 pounds, the plants are just not configured to take animals of that size.
Mike tried to put them on a diet.
Right now it's just basically ground corn. There's some vitamins and minerals and salt in there. Now usually we would have soybean meal, dried distillers grains from the ethanol process in there as well, but those feeds are more expensive and we were trying to slow their growth. This diet should slow them down to about 1 pound a day, and where usually they're gaining 2.5 pounds a day at this stage.
But even on a diet, they were growing beyond the 280-pound mark by the day.
The
It was a
corn,
no-win
if you
scenario.
mix it
They had
with
shipments of
boiled
baby
water
pigs still coming in from
and you
nursing
let it
farms.
dry.
They were running out of space and feed. The current pigs were getting
You know
too
how much
fat,
is
and
good.
factories were still closed.
Last
You get
case
put
situation
in.
is unfortunately where farmers have to consider euthanizing some
Or
animals.
you want me to do like
Combined, Mike's
Africa?
cooperative has had to euthanize over 3,400 pigs.
About $500,000 worth.
But Mike estimates if you add in the feed costs, the loss for his co-op is upwards of $1.5 million.
I don't know that's even possible to compare the economic losses to sort of the psychological, impact that this has on producers. Neither one are positive. It's really kind of a double whammy, I think.
The situation Mike's co-op faced was happening all over the country.
So one way to think about it is like this. In this country, we have a processing capacity of about 500,000 pigs per day.
Remember, the industry was running at about 40% below capacity.
If you do the math, every day that's an extra 200,000 pigs that were meant to go to market but instead stayed on the farm. So you do that for 5 days, which happened. That's 1 million extra pigs that were going to go to market.
After a couple of weeks, that's millions of pigs at risk of being euthanized. All of this is why consumers have seen higher meat prices
so
and those empty
cute.
shelves,
Let them
which Jason
free.
estimates may stretch out for at least another 6 months. Since
it's so
mid-May, things have started getting
If
better.
I catch
Factories
one on
like
the street,
Smithfield,
I
Sioux
can
Falls
feed
have
my
reopened,
child
with limited production and social distancing
and your
measures.
neighbors will.
Euthanization of animals has slowed, and as a result, production and meat prices have started to stabilize. But what can we do
Imagine
so this doesn't happen again? One option is to
them
rely
all
more on
running
smaller,
freely
vertically
outside.
integrated farms.
When you see a piece of meat in the grocery store, it's typically been touched by 15 or 20 different types of
They should
companies. And all of those
release them
companies are
pigs.
hyper specialized and they
Let them
operate
run.
at a really efficient scale.
That's Anya. She owns Belcampo Farms, a vertically integrated meat
Well,
company
if
out
pig
in
is
Northern
so much
California.
expensive,
Our supply
you know,
chain
hunt one
relies
yourself.
entirely on our own
If it's
infrastructure.
crossing by
We
the
own
street
our own
of your
farms, our
door,
own slaughterhouse,
you're going quink,
and
quink, quink,
several
and it's
direct-to-consumer
knocking at your
businesses.
door as well.
Belcampo's home to
We're gonna
3,000
bring that
grass-fed
behind
organic
your
cattle.
garden and
They have
slaughter
30,000
that.
acres to roam and live 7 to 10
Cow, you
times
should go
longer than
India.
conventional cattle. The slaughtering process
There's
is
a
also
lot
slowed
already
down,
running
with
free
only
there.
50 to 60 animals processed a day in a slaughterhouse that Belcampo owns, just 20 minutes from the farm.
If you
I
go
think of it as
mine,
like
there's a lot of
intentional
dog.
inefficiency.
And because Belcampo exists
So China
outside of the
is,
normal meat industry,
you know
We're
what
not
I mean?
reliant
They're
on the
winning
broader
the
meat
street there.
infrastructure. Since we have our own slaughterhouse that we've had extremely aggressive and proactive safety measures in, we have not had any issues.
this also made it easier for Anya to start social distancing measures in the plant before the CDC required it.
We implemented mandatory temp checking and a questionnaire every day as of like March 18th.
Direct-to-consumer models could be another shakeup in the industry, cutting out distribution centers. Anya's e-commerce site saw unprecedented traffic, and her app, delivering meat to homes in San Francisco and LA,
Went from like 3,000 to 20,000 users
My
in the
granddad
past
was a
month.
butcher,
As
so
for the
you
bigger
know
meat
what I
companies
mean?
at the heart of this issue,
I
Jason
know
has a few
lot
ideas.
about meat.
More medium-sized plants for starters, so if one goes down, it doesn't
Me,
take
if I
the
was
whole
in my
supply chain
island, the
with it.
pandemic
Even
was
if you're one
that
of the large
closing that
processors,
much,
you may
losing
think
that
about
much.
giving up some of that economies of
Dude, that
scale
would be a
to
big
maybe reduce some risks.
festival
But
for
Jason
me.
says the most effective change would
I will
be
free all of them
robots
animals.
don't get sick.
It's just hard.
Why
We're not putting together car parts that are uniform in shape and size. Animals are different sizes, shapes, weights.
But whether or not the meat industry will make any of these changes comes down to what the consumers demand and how much they're willing to pay for any real changes.
It's been a choice we've been making with our wallets for years, where we love cheap protein. Our customers are going to pay up for a secure supply chain. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more people are going to raise their hands and say, I'm opting out.
From pig pens to oyster cages, our next stop takes us underwater.
These cages contain more than 30 million oysters. They are grown here at one of the largest oyster farms on the East Coast. But these little guys are hard to cultivate. They need constant care, or else an entire crop can get wiped out.
It's kind of a good mixture of science and heavy labor. So it's hard work, long hours, it's 7 days a week.
And the work doesn't stop there. After the oysters are harvested, it's a race against time to get them safely to consumers. We went inside Ward Oyster Company to see how it harvests 3.5 million oysters every year, bringing them from algae tanks to your plate. This is John Vigliata. He began his career on the water when he was 13 years old.
I started putting oysters in cages in 1995.
This aquaculture farm sprawls over 884 acres, the size of over 147 Roman Colosseums. It includes a hatchery, nursery, and part of Virginia's Mobjack Bay. Farming an oyster begins in the hatchery. Here, biologist Chris Smith puts 3,000 adult oysters into a shallow tank called a spawning table. Then, he artificially creates the conditions that cause oysters to spawn.
We're controlling the temperature in the tank specifically. It's the all-you-can-eat buffet, getting them ready to spawn.
When the oysters spawn, they release their eggs and sperm directly into the water. The eggs and sperm are put into tanks, where they turn into oyster larvae. 1 billion oyster babies are produced in these tanks every year. They remain there for about 3 weeks, feeding on algae and growing shells.
We grow about 7 different species of algae to create a menu for our oysters and clams. It's amazing to see the algae kind of bloom and then to watch the oysters and clams grow in our facility. It's very gratifying.
When the oysters get to be about 1/4 inch long, they are placed outside in upweller tanks.
And it's a system in which allows a large quantity of water to be flown past the oysters, giving them a superabundant amount of food.
After about 2 months of feeding, staff check on the size of the oysters.
We'll take these oysters here that are larger, and they'll go in a cage to go overboard. And then these oysters here will go back into the system for a further grow out to where they can get to be this size and eventually go in a cage.
The cages full of oysters are then tossed into the Mobjack Bay.
We have about 2,500 to 3,000 cages. Contained in all the cages that we have out in the Mobjack Bay, you probably have somewhere around 30 million oysters.
That is a lot of oysters. If all of them were harvested at once and put into your freezer, you could eat over 800 oysters every day for 100 years, and you would still have leftovers.
Room 5, where Becky will holiday with her 3 cousins and lose a tooth. Here, she'll drift off wondering, how will the tooth fairy get in? Answer, the connecting door, through which 3 tooth fairies will creep with chocolate coins.
Yeah, there's no sea taste over there.
Hilton, to new memories.
Have the taste of the sea in a mountain and a moon.
Nicely done.
Farmers monitor the weather closely. Excessive rainfall can dilute the salt in the water, which could kill the oysters. And water temperature is also a factor.
Oysters grow best between 60 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees. If you go above that, it just gets so hot that they will stop growing or slow down significantly. If it goes below that, they go dormant.
If all goes well, after 6 months, the cages are removed from the water and the oysters are brought to a separator. This machine sorts them by size. If they are not big enough to sell, they go back in the water. Oysters can take around 1 to 2 years to go from hatchery to market. After separation, market-sized oysters are washed, tagged with order information, and boxed. Once the oysters come out of the bay, the clock starts ticking. The team has to harvest the oysters, transport them to the shop, add ice, package them, and place them in the cooler within 2 hours to meet FDA guidelines. The boxes are put into a refrigerated truck and shipped to distributors across the U.S., who pay around 40 cents per oyster. In Virginia, wild-caught oysters actually sell for less, around 30 cents.
We probably sell our market oysters to 10 or 15 different states in the country, but our oysters end up everywhere.
And occasionally, for local orders, John delivers himself.
Gotcha. And then you have the tag here.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Customers say that they're fresh, they're delicious.
Since 1996, they've gone from farming 100,000 oysters per year to 3.5 million in 2019.